Right, we're moving into Revelation 17 and 18. Yay. And
Yay.
we've been in Revelation at 17 and 18 several times before today. And so there's not actually a whole lot that we need to really talk about in depth, but I did want to go over in some detail, go over the main passages that lie behind Revelation 17 and 18. That handout, which I sent out, you guys see that? So I sent it out last night, and I also sent it out about a month ago. So you probably have 2 copies, and they're both the same. So I'll save you some time there. You don't have to compare them. Yeah, so I sent it out like a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago. It was a really miscalculation on when we would finish chapter 16. And I should have known it would take longer. So
better too early than too late.
Better too early than too late. And there was a lot of stuff on this outline, and I wanted you guys to have an opportunity to at least, read some of these background passages, so that you would have an idea what we're talking about here. There are a couple of there are definitely main background passages. Jeremiah 50 and 51 is one of the main passages, and also Ezekiel 26 to 28. And that's on page 2. You can see how that's kind of highlighted in the table there. And then there's a person, Jezebel, who is a model or a picture of what God is doing with Babylon the Great in the book of Revelation. And I think we'll look at Jezebel today. She's an interesting character, and interesting and unpleasant. She would make an excellent Disney villain, but
she's bad. She's bad.
She's bad. Yeah, she's really bad. So I've got on page 1, it's at the very bottom of that page, passages referred to in this table, starting with 1 Kings 16. We can just look at those and kind of get the idea of what's going on with Jezebel. So 1 Kings 16, 29 to 34. So picks up with Ahab becoming the king of Israel. In verse 29, Ahab is the son of Omri. Omri was a very wicked and evil king, and he was really wicked. But then Ahab surpassed him in his wickedness. Ahab becomes the worst king. Just like David is the standard of righteousness, Ahab becomes the opposite. In the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab, the son of Omri, began to reign over Israel. And Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. And as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, he took for his wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. He erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. And Ahab made an Asherah, that's a pole to worship. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. In his days, Hiel of Bethel built Jericho. He laid its foundation at the cost of Abiram, his firstborn, and set up its gates at the cost of his youngest son, Segub, according to the word of the Lord, which he had spoke by Joshua, the son of Nun. So Ahab is introduced as a terrible, terrible king. He did more evil than any other king before him. And then Jezebel is introduced, and I find it quite interesting how Jezebel is introduced, because it doesn't just say that Ahab married Jezebel, the daughter of the king of the Sidonians. It says, look, he was the worst king ever. He was so bad. He did all these horrible things. He built up a temple for Baal. He put up Asherah poles everywhere. He perverted the worship of Israel. And if that wasn't enough, he went and married that woman over there, Jezebel. So Jezebel is introduced in a way that it's obvious that Jezebel is going to be adding to the wickedness. And in fact, when we go on and we read the history of Jezebel, we see that she becomes basically the driving force in the persecution of God's prophets and God's people. Jezebel is the one behind that. And she is the one that is the backbone of the throne. And you see that in particular, if you've read these passages, you see that in particular with the incident with Naboth and his vineyard, how Ahab is portrayed as like a 4-year-old, whimpering, petulant child, and Jezebel is the force behind the throne, getting him to do these evil things. That's not to absolve Ahab of any responsibility, but just to show how Jezebel is portrayed here. So the next passage, we want to go to chapter 18. After many days, the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, "Go show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth." So Elijah went to show himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab called Obadiah, who was over the household. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly, and when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in a cave and fed them with bread and water. That's an amazing thing. Obadiah lives in the king's household, and he's defying the queen, a powerful, vindictive queen. Verse 5, and Ahab said to Obadiah, "Go through the land to all the springs of water and to all the valleys. Perhaps we may find grass and save the horses and mules alive and not lose some of the animals." So it hasn't been raining for some time now. So they divided the land between them to pass through it. And Obadiah went in one direction by himself. Ahab went in one direction by himself, and Obadiah went in another direction by himself. And as Obadiah was on the way, behold, Elijah met him. And Obadiah recognized him and fell on his face and said, "Is it you, my lord Elijah?" And he answered him, "It is I. Go tell your lord, behold, Elijah is here." And he said, "How have I sinned that you would give your servant into the hand of Ahab to kill him, or to kill me? As the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my Lord has not sent to seek you." And when they would say, "He is not here," he would take an oath of the kingdom or nation that they had not found you. And now you say, "Go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here." And as soon as I have gone from you, the Spirit of the Lord will carry you, I know not where. And so when I come and tell Ahab and he cannot find you, he will kill me, although I, your servant, have feared the Lord from my youth. Has it not been told, my Lord, what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord? How I hid 100 men of the Lord's prophets by 50s in a cave and fed them with bread and water. And now you say, "Go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here, and he will kill me." And Elijah said, "As the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself to him today." So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is it you, you troubler of Israel?" And he answered, "I have not troubled Israel, but you have in your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals. Now therefore send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal, and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." So what do we learn about Jezebel from this passage?
Powerful.
Powerful, wicked, promoting false worship, friends with the priesthood. She's a killer of God's people, a suppressor and a killer of the prophets. It's interesting, that she comes up at the end of this section here. The attack, but what's going to happen next? About the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. Hilarious story. This one's also, the one we just read is kind of funny, with Obadiah saying, "I'm gonna die. He's gonna kill me." But the point of the story, the point of the next story, the next episode with on Mount Carmel, this doesn't, Ahab's reaction to this is not recorded. When Elijah defeats the prophets of Baal, the person who's upset is Jezebel. And Jezebel says, I'm going to kill that guy. I'm going to kill Elijah. Yeah, Mom.
This passage also has a small clue as to how powerful Jezebel is, unless I'm mistaken, and I easily could be. It says, oh shoot, I just lost it. Oh, the last verse we read. Bring all these prophets who eat at Jezebel's table,
Yeah,
not at Ahab's table.
right. Yeah, it's definitely about Jezebel's power and influence, and it sets it up for the very next thing, which is the confrontation. That this is a confrontation between God and Elijah and Jezebel, God and Jezebel, and the false prophets and the false god Baal and Asherah, and so Jezebel becomes the antagonist, right? She's the antagonist in this section. Even though Ahab is terrible, Jezebel's actually the power there that's being challenged and confronted. So,
Well,
we're from,
Something,
yeah.
something too I heard about that same verse that you just read about the prophets at the table, or Jezebel's table, is that there were two different sets of false prophets, and I think the amount was like 850, and 400 of them were supported by Jezebel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're probably all supported by Jezebel. It depends on where there's a comma, right? Where you put the comma in that sentence. And there's no punctuation in the original, but verse 19, now therefore send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal, no comma, and the 400 prophets of Asherah, comma,
Yeah. Okay.
who eat at Jezebel's table. That's 850 prophets at the table.
Yeah. So there were two different sets of them. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
two different sets. So she's promoting. She's anti God of Israel, and
Right.
pro false prophets, and it doesn't even matter that they're from different camps.
Yeah. Okay.
So
I was
she's,
reading it right, and I
Yep.
want to make sure I was reading it right.
Yep, you got it. So we're not going to read the defeat of the prophets. You guys know how that goes. We'll pick up again in chapter 19. Go to chapter 19. Sorry to disappoint you. I know you wanted to hear again how. Chapter 19. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, so may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. Then surprisingly, he was afraid. And he arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, it is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers. And he lay down and slept under a broom tree. See, he'd rather have the Lord kill him than have Jezebel kill him. So he runs away. He goes to this town sort of far away, and he leaves his servant there. And then he goes another day's journey, so that probably, he's still separating himself from Jezebel, and now he's hiding in the wilderness. And so this is not a great picture of a courageous servant of God. This is a guy who's afraid of Jezebel. He comes to his senses later, but we all go through stuff like this. But anyway, verse 6.
Can't blame him.
Well, can and can't blame him. And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. I mean, he just saw God send down fire from heaven, right? He just saw God reverse the drought and send rain at the Lord's word.
Mm-hmm.
He just, his whole life has been an experience of God protecting him and doing what God has told him he would do. And Jezebel says, oh, now you're going to get it. And he's afraid. And I understand it and I don't understand it.
He's just hedging his bets.
Yeah. His bets. Let's see. And he looked, and behold, there was at his head, in verse 6. And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you. And he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. There he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? He said, I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. And he said, go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and a strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? And he said, I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. And the Lord said to him, go return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel Mehaloah, you shall anoint to be a prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death, and the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. So he departed from there and found Elisha, the son of Shebat, I say his name wrong, Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen in front of him, and he was with the 12th. Elijah passed by him and cast his cloak upon him, and he left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, let me kiss my father and my mother, and then I will follow you. And he said to him, go back again, for what have I done to you? And he returned from following him and took the yoke of oxen and sacrificed them and boiled their flesh with the yokes of the oxen and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he arose and went after Elijah and assisted him. So we have the confrontation of Jezebel, just the threat of a confrontation of Jezebel with Elijah, sends him off afraid. That the Lord comforts and strengthens him, tells him what to do, and Elijah goes back and he's doing these things, the work of the Lord. These things are not bringing him into direct confrontation with Jezebel, but that will eventually happen. Let's skip ahead to chapter 21. One of the most sad and pitiful stories, Naboth's vineyard. Now Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard in Jezreel beside the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria. And after this, Ahab said to Naboth, give me your vineyard that I may have it for a vegetable garden, because it is near my house, and I will give you a better vineyard for it. Or if it seems good to you, I will give you its value in money. But Naboth said to Ahab, the Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers. And Ahab went into his house vexed and sullen because of what Naboth the Jezreelite had said to him, for he had said, I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers. And he lay down on his bed and turned away his face and would eat no food. This is pathetic, right?
Pouting.
Man, this is a grown man, king of Israel.
Howling.
Unbelievable. But Jezebel, his wife, came to him and said to him, why is your spirit so vexed? Do you know where we are, Stephanie? Okay, so we're in 1 Kings 21. And I just read verse 5. It's good to have you with us.
Good to see everybody.
Yeah.
Good to see you, Steph.
So
Good
First
to
Kings,
hear you, Steph.
1 Kings 21, picking up at verse 5. But Jezebel, his wife, came to him and said to him, "Why is your spirit so vexed that you eat no food?" And he said to her, "Because I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite and said to him, 'Give me your vineyard for money, or else if it please you, I will give you another vineyard for it.' And he answered, 'I will not give you my vineyard.' And Jezebel, his wife, said to him, 'Do you now govern Israel? Arise and eat bread, and let your heart be cheerful. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite.' So she wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with his seal, and she sent the letters to the elders and the leaders who lived with Naboth in his city. And she wrote in the letters, 'Proclaim a fast,' and set Naboth at the head of the people, and set 2 worthless men opposite him, and let them bring a charge against him, saying, 'You have cursed God and the king.' Then take him out and stone him to death." And the men of his city, the elders and the leaders who lived in his city, did as Jezebel had sent word to them. That should tell you something about the power and influence of Jezebel. As it was written in the letters that she had sent to them, they proclaimed a fast and set Naboth at the head of the people. And the 2 worthless men came in and sat opposite him. And the worthless men brought a charge against Naboth in the presence of the people, saying, "Naboth cursed God and the king." So they took him outside the city, stoned him to death with stones. Then they sent to Jezebel, saying, "Naboth has been stoned, he is dead." As soon as Jezebel heard that Naboth had been stoned and was dead, Jezebel said to Ahab, "Arise, take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite, which he refused to give you for money, for Naboth is not alive but dead." And as soon as Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, Ahab arose to go down to the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite to take possession of it. So she's just, how would you describe a person who acts like that?
She's such a Jezebel.
Such a Jezebel. Yeah. She's a terrible, terrible, terrible person. And not just in the big giant things of persecuting God's people, but just in this is nothing. Ahab wants to grow tomatoes, and this is a nothing thing, right? She's so wicked. Verse 17, then the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, "Arise, go down to meet Ahab, king of Israel, who is in Samaria. Behold, he is in the vineyard of Naboth, where he has gone to take possession. And you shall say to him, 'Thus says the Lord, have you killed and also taken possession?' And you shall say to him, 'Thus says the Lord, in the place where dogs licked up the blood of Naboth, shall dogs lick your own blood.'" Ahab said to Elijah, "Have you found me, O my enemy?" He answered, "I have found you because you have sold yourself to do what is evil in the sight of the Lord. Behold, I will bring disaster upon you. I will utterly burn you up, and I will cut off from Ahab every male, bond or free in Israel. And I will make your house like the house of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha, son of Ahijah, for the anger to which you have provoked me, and because you have made Israel to sin." And of Jezebel, the Lord also said, "The dogs shall eat Jezebel within the walls of Jezreel. Anyone belonging to Ahab who dies in the city, the dogs shall eat, and anyone of his who dies in the open country, the birds of the heavens shall eat." So that eating birds of the heavens shall eat, that comes up in a lot of different places in the Old Testament and the New Testament. We read about it in Revelation. Also, the birds are going to have that feast. It's a picture of the utter defeat of the enemies. David said it to Goliath, I'm going to kill you and the birds are going to eat you, that kind of thing. And then Goliath said it back to David. It's an idiomatic type of thing. Verse 25, there was none who sold himself to do what was evil in the sight of the Lord like Ahab, whom Jezebel, his wife, incited. He acted very abominably in going after idols, as the Amorites had done, whom the Lord cast out before the people of Israel. And when Ahab heard those words, he tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his flesh and fasted and lay in sackcloth and went about dejectedly. And the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, "Have you seen how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Because he has humbled himself before me, I will not bring the disaster in his days, but in his son's days I will bring the disaster upon his house. So that Ahab dies in battle, and we read about that in the next chapter. We're going to skip over that, but he dies in battle. This is the one where he tells Jehoshaphat to wear the royal robes and is killed anyway, because the Lord can direct a haphazard arrow to accomplish his will. Let's go to 2 Kings chapter 9. Read a bit more about Jezebel.
I see God's judgment being portrayed in all those scriptures too. We just read.
Yes. Yeah, and it's and the judgment of God is just going to get worse, or better, depending on whose side you're reading it from. It's going to become more and more evident as we go on. So God had told Elijah to anoint Hazael, king of, Syria, and then also Jehu, make him king of Israel, and to have a successor, Elisha, whom he is to anoint also. So now we get to 2 Kings 9, where Jehu is anointed. And it's a long section. Yeah, we'll start in verse 1. Then Elisha, the prophet, called one of the sons of the prophets and said to him, tie up your garments and take this flask of oil in your hand and go to Ramoth Gilead. And when you arrive, look there for Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi, and go in and have him rise from among his fellows and lead him to an inner chamber. Then take the flask of oil and pour it on his head and say, thus says the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel. Then open the door and flee, do not linger. So the young man, the servant of the prophet, went to Ramoth Gilead. And when he came, behold, the commanders of the army were in council, and he said, I have a word for you, O commander. And Jehu said, to which of us all? And he said, to you, O commander. So he arose and went into the house, and the young man poured the oil on his head, saying to him, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I anoint you king over the people of the Lord, over Israel. And you shall strike down the house of Ahab, your master, so that I may avenge on Jezebel the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off from Ahab every male, bond or free in Israel. And I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha, the son of Ahijah. And the dogs shall eat Jezebel in the territory of Jezreel, and none shall bury her. Then he opened the door and fled. That's a nice, cheery message, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Do we get an idea of why he wanted or felt the need to have him run away as soon as he anointed this guy king?
I don't know. I haven't looked at the notes to see what the commentators speculate either. I don't know. Yeah. It could just be that he's supposed to deliver a message and not answer any questions. Yeah, it could be something like that.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Yeah. Verse 11, did you notice in the thing that we read in verse 7, you shall strike down the house of Ahab, your master, so that I may avenge on Jezebel the blood of my servants, the prophets. Verse 11, when Jehu came out to the servants of his master, they said to him, is all well? Why did this mad fellow come to you? And he said to them, you know the fellow and his talk. And they said, that's not true. Tell us now. And he said, thus and so he spoke to me, saying, thus says the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel. Then in haste every man of them took his garment and put it under him on the bare steps, and they blew the trumpet and proclaimed Jehu as king. Thus Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. Now Joram, with all Israel, had been on guard at Ramoth Gilead against Hazael, king of Syria, but King Joram had returned to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds that the Syrians had given him. So Joram is the son of Ahab. Joram, the king here, is the son of Ahab. Verse 15, but King Joram had returned to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds that the Syrians had given him when he had fought with Hazael, king of Syria. So Jehu said, if this is your decision, then let no one slip out of the city to go to tell the news in Jezreel. Then Jehu mounted his chariot and went to Jezreel, for Joram lay there. And Ahaziah, king of Judah, had come down to visit Joram. Now the watchman was standing on the tower in Jezreel, and he saw the company of Jehu as he came and said, I see a company. And Joram said, take a horseman and send him to meet them, and let him say, is it peace? So a man on horseback went to meet him and said, thus says the king, is it peace? Jehu said, what do you have to do with peace? Turn around and ride behind me. And the watchman reported, saying, the messenger reached them, but he is not coming back. Then he sent out a second horseman who came to them and said, thus the king has said, is it peace? And Jehu answered, what do you have to do with peace? Turn around and ride behind me. Again, the watchman reported, he reached them, but he is not coming back. And the driving is like the driving of Jehu, the son of Nimshi, for he drives furiously. Okay, so he's one of those drivers on the freeway that you know, because he's crazy driver. Joram said, make ready. And they made ready his chariot. And then Joram, the king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, set out, each in his chariot, and went to meet Jehu, and met him at the property of Naboth the Jezreelite. Uh-oh. You should know something's up now. And when Joram saw Jehu, he said, is it peace, Jehu? And he answered, what peace can there be, so long as the whorings and sorceries of your mother Jezebel are so many? Here she's called a whore and a sorcerer. Then Joram reigned about and fled, saying to Ahaziah, treachery, O Ahaziah. And Jehu drew his bow with his full strength and shot Joram between the shoulders, so that the arrow pierced his heart, and he sank in his chariot. Jehu said to Bidkar, his aide, take him up and throw him on the plot of ground belonging to Naboth the Jezreelite. For remember, when you and I rode side by side behind Ahab his father, how the Lord made this pronouncement against him. As surely as I saw yesterday the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, declares the Lord, I will repay you on this plot of ground. Now therefore take him up and throw him on the plot of ground, in accordance with the word of the Lord. When Ahaziah, the king of Judah, saw this, he fled in the direction of Beth-Hagan. Jehu pursued him and said, shoot him also. And they shot him in his chariot at the ascent of Gur, which is by Iblim. And he fled to Megiddo and died there. His servants carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem and buried him in his tomb with his fathers in the city of David. In the 11th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, Ahaziah began to reign over Judah. And now the really fun part. When Jehu came to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it. And she painted her eyes and adorned her head and looked out of the window. And as Jehu entered the gate, she said, is it peace, you Zimri, murderer of your master? So she has heard that he has killed Joram.
Her son.
Her son, right. She's heard that. Zimri was a former king in Israel who he became king by killing the present king. So she's making an allusion to that by calling him Zimri. Zimri killed his master, and Jehu has just done the same thing. Verse 32, and he lifted up his face to the window and said, who is on my side? Who? 2 or 3 eunuchs looked out at him. He said, throw her down. So they threw her down. And some of her blood spattered on the wall and on the horses, and they trampled on her. Then he went in and ate and drank. And he said, see now to this cursed woman and bury her, for she is a king's daughter. But when they went out to bury her, they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. And when they came back and told him, he said, this is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite. In the territory of Jezreel, the dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel, and the corpse of Jezebel shall be as dung on the face of the field in the territory of Jezreel, so that no one can say, this is Jezebel. She wasn't even going to be buried. I mean, that's a extreme dishonor. So she hears that there's a revolt going on. She hears that her son, the king, has been murdered, killed by Jehu. And she hears Jehu is coming for her. And so the first thing she does is she puts on her makeup and her fancy dress, and she stands at the window like a harlot, trying to seduce him. Look what you can have if you don't kill me. What a great scene with the eunuchs. Toss her out the window. And then Jehu, so this woman, the queen mother, now has just been tossed out of the window and has been trampled by horses to death. And the picture of Jehu is just fantastic, I think. And Jehu, he's standing outside. She's just hit the ground. She's been trampled by the horses. And he goes, yeah, it's lunchtime. And it goes inside. He just goes inside and he eats.
How about you? I'm hungry.
I'm hungry. Anybody got a sandwich? He sits down, he has lunch, and when he's done with lunch, he goes, still got to take care of that. Somebody go bury that woman. So he's giving her the amount of respect she deserves, right? So Jezebel, terrible person, kills the Lord's prophets, threatens the Lord's prophets, terrorizes them, manipulates her husband, gains things by just terrible. The taking of Naboth's field and the killing of Naboth, that's very reminiscent actually of the death of Jesus, with the unworthy characters making accusations and the city leaders turning against Naboth, turning against Christ. But you have this picture of Jezebel. There's not one good thing you can say about her. There's nothing. There's not a good word anywhere. And then in chapter 10, we have Jehu. This is an account of Jehu going through Samaria, and he kills all of Ahab's descendants, tracks them all down and kills them all. And then he kills the prophets of Baal. I mean, Jehu is just, and then at the end, with Jehu, it's terrible. If we just skip ahead to verse 28 of chapter 10, just to hear what happened with Jehu. Thus Jehu wiped out Baal from Israel. And then the word but Jehu did not turn aside from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which he made Israel to sin. That is, the golden calves that were in Bethel and in Dan. And the Lord said to Jehu, because you have done well in carrying out what is right in my eyes, and have done to the house of Ahab according to all that was in my heart, your sons of the fourth generation shall sit on the throne of Israel. But Jehu was not careful to walk in the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He did not turn from the sins of Jeroboam, which he made Israel to sin. In those days, the Lord began to cut off parts of Israel. And then it tells about the death of Jehu and all of that. So Jehu does all this great work of vengeance for the Lord upon Ahab and Jezebel, upon the prophets of Baal, but Jehu himself does not follow the Lord with a whole heart. And then that last line I read, verse 32, in those days, the Lord began to cut off parts of Israel. The territory of Israel is becoming smaller. That's what's happening here. The Lord, this is a terrible thing. Even though the kingdom's been split now, and there's now two kingdoms, Judah and Israel, the Lord had given these people that land as their possession. And now it's got to the point where they're losing the land. He's cutting them off. And so we have this downward thing going on with the kings. So Jezebel becomes this picture that is reused in Revelation, in the harlot of Revelation. And sadly, I spent all the time reading the passages, and we're at the end of our hour almost. But let's really quickly go to Revelation 17.
Well, also, I guess you could say too, Jehu, he got all the blessings of God, but he had no real love for the Lord. And he did it all maybe to suit himself rather than for the Lord, because he had no real love for the Lord.
Well, it does look like, at the end, obviously his heart was not fully committed to the Lord, fully committed against Ahab and Jezebel, fully committed against the prophets of Baal, but not fully committed to the Lord. He could have just gone the next step and got rid of all idolatry. Yeah, Mom.
Mm-hmm.
This is an interesting story. It's a little bit too complicated to share in just a minute with someone, but as an answer to the person who says, well, I've been good all my life, God should let me into heaven. So Jehu had done all the right things and the things he was told to do, but he didn't have a repentant heart.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's true. Yeah. So I think, what time is it? It's like 10:27 right now, 10:27. So if you're looking at the outline, let's just look at that real quick. And what I'll ask you to do is this week, read Revelation 17 and 18, and we'll save our time. So next week, we won't spend the whole time reading a lot of chapters. But what I want to point out is what's on that table there, that we can just look at a couple of these real quick. So in Revelation 17:16, we'll just look. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. So here we have the prostitute. Jezebel was called a whore, prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. So those things were said about Jezebel too, the devouring of the flesh. You'll remember we read that, and I have the verses there. In 17:4, you have, just like Jezebel was dressed for, dressed up to the hilt. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. So she's all dressed up fancy, and by her, this is to mean basically the appeal. She's appealing to a certain type of people, and she's that last bit about holding the cup full of her abominations, that doesn't look real pretty, but the clothing and stuff. She's a queen. Obviously, we know that from the Revelation passage. Jezebel seduced Ahab to do wickedly. And if you look at 17:2, it says, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk. That's just a picture of getting people to do your will, or following your behavior. We already know the commit spiritual fornication or idolatry. That's all throughout the Revelation passage. She's called in Revelation a sorceress or used of sorcery in 1823. Look at that. Very last line. All the nations were deceived by your sorcery. So you'll remember that Jezebel was called a whore and a sorceress. Seeks economic prosperity greedily. That's obvious. 18:11 and forward is all about that. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her, since no one buys their cargo anymore, cargo of gold, silver, jewels, pearls, fine linen, etc. Verse 14, the fruit for which your soul longed has gone from you, and all your delicacies and your splendors are lost to you, never to be found again. The merchants of these wares who gained wealth from her will stand far off in fear of her torment, weeping and mourning aloud. Alas, for the great city that was clothed in fine linen, and purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, with jewels, and with pearls. For in a single hour, this wealth has been laid waste. Persecutes and killed the saints. We know Jezebel did that. We know that Babylon does that. Chapter 17, verse 6. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. That's just one way to say that she kills the saints. There is a remnant that refuses to participate in the harlot's sins mentioned in 17:14, just as the people who refuse to participate with Jezebel. God's judgment is given to avenge the blood of his servants. We read that in 2 Kings, also in Revelation 19:2, after the fall of Jezebel, or actually after the fall of the whore of Babylon. For his judgments are true and just, for he has judged the great prostitute who corrupted the earth with her immorality, and he has avenged on her the blood of his servants. That's nearly identical with what he said about Jezebel. Destruction is quick, in 1 hour, in 2 Kings, and then in 18 verse 10, Revelation 18 verse 10 says, they will stand far off in fear of her torment and say, alas, alas, you great city, you mighty city Babylon, for in a single hour your judgment has come. It's the same phraseology there. Followers are judged. I skipped over that in the 2 Kings, but I mentioned that all of the house of Ahab is destroyed. All of the prophets of Baal are destroyed. The same thing in chapter 18 of Revelation, verse 9 through 11. And the kings of the earth who committed sexual immorality and lived in luxury with her will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning. Let's see. So they're weeping and wailing, not because they're so sad that Babylon the Great has fallen, but because they're going to suffer economically. So they're participating in the judgment. And then, of course, destroyed according to the word of God, just as God had said he would do that. So we have this table of similarities between Jezebel of the Old Testament and the Babylon the Great in the New Testament, who is Israel. Israel has become the great persecutor of God's people. Israel has become the one that turns the head of the actual power, who's Rome, and Rome then persecutes God's people. Israel is described in the same way as Jezebel is in these couple of chapters in Revelation. So it's just another example of God taking an Old Testament enemy, and God's people, God's former people have now become that. They have now become that. And so the judgment that the former enemy gets is then redescribed in the Revelation and applied to the new enemy, the new incarnation of that former enemy. So we've seen that a lot. Yeah.
Another thing I've always heard too about the great whore of Babylon in chapter 17, that actually refers to all the religions of the world.
Yeah, there are a couple of different interpretations of that, and I understand how they get there. I think that the case can be made easily for this being a particular incarnation of false religion, being the false religion being the false religion at that time of the Jewish religious leaders. But it's actually, they're not being judged for their false beliefs so much as for their practice in persecuting the saints, and also for getting Rome to attack God's people. So those are the two great sins. And on a futurist view, in some futurist systems, the Babylon the Great becomes more of the idea of false worship, false religions that lead people astray. But the text itself actually says that the judgment is because she persecuted the saints and killed the prophets, just like Jezebel did. So, but we can talk more about that next week. It's 10:35, and I'm happy to talk about all different questions and inputs. Mom.
I just wanted to say this was very helpful today.
Oh,
Thank
good.
you.
Yeah. Thank you all for listening while I read all those passages. I know that's hard to do sometimes. So this week, try to read Revelation 17 and 18. And if you're feeling really ambitious, read Jeremiah 50 and 51, which is actually an oracle against Babylon, the actual Babylon in the Old Testament. And you'll see that Revelation 17 and 18 is pretty much modeled after that. And so we have, a couple of things coming together there, the Jezebel thing. Yes, Gail.
We'll be gone next week.
Okay.
We're going to go visit brothers.
Yay.
Yay.
All right.
Mm.
Well, we'll miss you, and we'll probably finish this outline because I'm going to kind of not go point by point on the next one. If you read the passages, the two main passages, you'll see that the stuff in the rest of the outline is easily verified. Okay. Anything else? Mom.
I have to leave. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.